They thought my uniform was a white flag, a badge of insignificance in their world of silk and gold. When the CEO's wife laughed, she didn't just demand my exit, she ignited a countdown. Little did she know, the footage I carried out contained more than her arrogance. It held the keys to her downfall. The atmosphere at the Gilded Rose was a thick cocktail of expensive cologne, overpriced champagne, and the suffocating scent of old money. To the patrons, I was a ghost in a crisp, white apron, a silent delivery system for their decadence. I navigated the sea of velvet booths with a tray balanced on one hand, my face a mask of professional neutrality. But behind that mask, I was observing everything. I wasn't just a waitress, I was a student of human frailty, watching the powerful unravel when they thought no one important was looking. The VIP section was a glass-walled aquarium of ego. At the center sat Marcus Thorne, the CEO of a global logistics empire, and his wife, Julianne. Julianne didn't walk. She glided, draped in diamonds that sparkled like frozen tears. She had a way of looking through service staff as if we were transparent, a mere glitch in her perfectly curated reality. On this particular night, the air around their table was charged with a jagged tension that no amount of vintage crystal could smooth over. I approached with their second bottle, the condensation on the glass chilling my fingertips. As I leaned in to clear a stray olive pit, Julianne's laughter, sharp and brittle as breaking ice, suddenly cut through the ambient jazz. She had been arguing with Marcus, her voice a low hiss until it snapped. She turned her venomous gaze toward me, her eyes narrowing as if she had just noticed a stain on a priceless rug. "This is unacceptable," she drawled, her voice loud enough to make the neighboring tables falter. "Marcus, I told you I wanted the private lounge. Why is this person still hovering in my peripheral vision?" I stood still, the bottle of champagne held firmly. "I apologize for the intrusion, ma'am. I was simply—" "I don't care what you were doing," she interrupted, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. She looked at her husband, then at the two security guards standing like statues near the entrance. "Get this waitress out of here," she told them with a mocking laugh, waving a manicured hand as if shooing a fly. "Her presence is ruining the vintage. She's distracting." The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus didn't look up from his phone. His silence was a silent endorsement of her cruelty. The security guards, men I had shared coffee with in the break room just an hour prior, looked at me with a mixture of pity and professional obligation. They moved toward me, the heavy thud of their boots echoing against the marble floor. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply set the champagne bottle down on the table with a soft, deliberate click. I looked Julianne directly in the eye, not with anger, but with a terrifyingly calm clarity. It was the look of someone who had just found the final piece of a very complex puzzle. As they escorted me toward the service exit, I felt the eyes of the elite burning into my back. They thought they were witnessing a humiliation. In reality, they were watching the opening move of a takeover. I knew exactly where the blind spots in the club's security were, and more importantly, I knew exactly which server room held the digital record of what had just happened, along with several other incidents Julianne likely preferred to keep in the dark. I bypassed the locker room and headed straight for the manager's office. The door was ajar, and the glow of the monitors cast long, flickering shadows across the room. My hand didn't tremble as I reached for the external drive. I knew the login. I had watched it being typed 100 times while ghosting in the background. Within minutes, the footage of Julianne Thorne's public meltdown was encrypted and saved. It wasn't just a recording of a rude customer, it was a window into the Thorne family's unstable dynamic, a weakness that was about to become very expensive for them. I slipped the drive into my pocket, the cold metal feeling like a promise. As I walked out into the cool night air, leaving my apron behind on a trash bin, I didn't feel like a fired waitress. I felt like a hunter who had just spotted the trail. The neon sign of the club flickered above me, reflecting in the puddles on the pavement. It was a beautiful building, full of history and potential. It just needed a change in management. I took a deep breath, the scent of rain and city exhaust filling my lungs. Julianne Thorne thought she had ended my night. She had no idea she had just handed me the opening chapter of my new career. The game had shifted from service to strategy, and I was already 3 moves ahead. The digital file in my pocket felt heavier with every step I took away from the club. It wasn't just data, it was leverage. And in this city, leverage was the only currency that truly mattered. The following 3 weeks were a masterclass in calculated invisibility. While Julianne Thorne likely forgot my name the moment the service door clicked shut, I spent my days submerged in the digital shadows of her husband's empire. The security footage I had borrowed was the thread. When I pulled it, the entire tapestry of the Thorne Group began to unravel. It wasn't just the footage of her humiliating me. It was the 30 minutes prior, where the cameras captured a frantic, hushed exchange between Marcus and a man known for liquidating difficult assets. I traded my uniform for a sharp, charcoal gray suit that felt like armor. I wasn't sitting in a break room anymore. I was sitting in the glass-walled offices of venture capitalists who specialized in distressed properties. To them, I wasn't a waitress. I was a whistleblower with a surgical plan. I presented the footage not as a grievance, but as evidence of a PR nightmare waiting to happen, a liability that made the club's current ownership look like a sinking ship. The club, it turned out, was owned through a shell company under Julianne's name, a vanity project Marcus used to keep her occupied. But Julianne's management had left a trail of unpaid vendors and ignored safety violations. Using the footage as a catalyst, I initiated a quiet audit through a third-party firm I'd scouted months ago. Every time she had treated the staff like furniture, she had been creating witnesses. I gathered them like pearls on a string. By day 30, the Thorne Group was facing a quiet but lethal liquidity crisis. By day 35, I made my move. I didn't go to Marcus. I went to the bank, holding the mortgage on the club. I showed them the projected losses, the impending lawsuits from mistreated staff, and the footage of the owner creating a hostile environment that would destroy the brand's prestige. I didn't ask for a job. I asked for the deed. The negotiations were a symphony of office triggers. We discussed the security footage in hushed tones, the legal implications of Julianne's behavior hanging over the table like a guillotine. We drafted the purchase agreement with a cold, corporate efficiency that would have made Marcus Thorne proud had he not been the one losing the asset. My bank account, fueled by a silent partner who saw the brilliance in my inside-out takeover, was ready. On day 41, I sat in a mahogany-paneled room, the air smelling of wax and expensive ink. I didn't shake. I didn't hesitate. With a single fluid motion, I signed the purchase agreement for the Gilded Rose. The ink was barely dry when I made my first executive order. It wasn't about the menu or the music. It was about the guest list. I walked toward the club that night, the neon flickering against my skin. I wasn't entering through the service door this time. I watched from across the street as a familiar black SUV pulled up to the curb. Julianne stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement with that same rhythmic arrogance. She reached into her designer clutch, pulled out her gold-plated access card, and swiped it against the VIP reader. A red light flashed. She swiped again, more forcefully this time. Denied entry. She turned to the new security guard, a man I had hired specifically for his lack of sentimentality. "There must be a mistake," she hissed, her voice rising in that familiar, brittle pitch. "Do you know who I am? I own this place." The guard didn't blink. He looked at the tablet in his hand, then back at her. "The system says otherwise, ma'am. Your access has been revoked by the new owner." As she began to scream, I stepped out from the shadows. I didn't need to say a word. I just watched as the realization slowly dawned on her. The waitress was no longer clearing her table. I was the one who had cleared the room. The story is just getting started. If you want to see the moment Julianne finally realizes who is holding the keys and what happens when Marcus tries to buy me off. The glass doors of the club remained stubbornly sealed, reflecting Julianne's panicked expression like a distorted funhouse mirror. She swiped her card a third time, the plastic grinding against the electronic reader with a desperate, frantic energy. The red light blinked back at her, cold, rhythmic, and final. "This is a joke," she stammered, turning to the small crowd of socialites beginning to gather behind her. "Open the door this instant. I am Julianne Thorne." I stepped into the light of the entryway, the silence following me like a shadow. I wasn't carrying a tray, and I wasn't looking at the floor. I met her gaze with the practiced indifference of a landlord looking at a tenant who was 3 months behind on rent. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the humid night air with effortless precision. "The records were updated exactly 12 minutes ago. You aren't Julianne Thorne, the owner. You're just Julianne Thorne, the trespasser." Her jaw dropped, her carefully applied lipstick suddenly looking like a jagged wound. "You? But you're that girl, the one I'd fired." "You didn't fire me, Julianne. You gave me an afternoon off to go to the bank," I replied, a thin, ironic smile playing on my lips. "And while you were busy choosing between silk and satin, I was choosing between an aggressive buyout and a hostile takeover. I chose both." I turned to the security guard, nodding toward the purchase agreement glowing on his digital tablet. "Please inform the lady that her denied entry is permanent. And if she attempts to use that access card again, the security footage of her current behavior will be forwarded directly to the precinct as a formal harassment complaint." Julianne reached out, her hand trembling as she tried to grab my sleeve, but the guard stepped in with the mechanical efficiency of a man who knew exactly who signed his paychecks now. The crowd whispered, the sound like dry leaves skittering across the pavement. The hierarchy of the city had just shifted, and the vibration was felt by everyone standing on that sidewalk. "You won't get away with this," she hissed, though the fire in her voice had been replaced by a cold, creeping dread. "Marcus will burn this place to the ground before he lets a servant keep it." "He's welcome to try," I said, turning my back on her to face the velvet curtains of my new kingdom. "But tell him to check his email first. I believe his board of directors just received a copy of the incident logs. He might be a little too busy looking for a new job to worry about mine." As I walked through the doors, the scent of jasmine and success greeted me. The club was quiet, the staff standing at attention, waiting for my first command. I didn't want a drink. I didn't want an apology. I wanted the ledger. The interior of The Gilded Rose felt different now. The velvet wasn't just fabric, it was equity. The crystal chandeliers didn't just provide light, they reflected a return on investment. I walked through the main lounge, the silence of the empty club amplified by the weight of my footsteps on the polished marble. The staff stood in a loose semicircle near the bar, the same bartenders who had seen me humiliated, the same busboys who had looked away to save their own skins. They didn't look away now. Their eyes were locked on me, a mixture of terror and newfound respect. "Change the codes on every terminal," I said, my voice projecting with a natural authority that I hadn't realized I possessed until this moment. I want a full inventory of the cellar by morning, and someone find me the personnel files for the night shift. I retreated to the manager's office. My office. The chair was leather, oversized, and smelled faintly of Marcus Thorne's expensive tobacco. I sat down and pulled the purchase agreement from my briefcase, laying it flat on the desk. It was more than just paper. It was a map of a battlefield I had already won, but the victory wasn't complete. A club like this didn't just run on booze and music. It ran on secrets. I opened the master computer and pulled up the security footage from the last 48 hours. I wasn't looking for Julianne this time. I was looking for the leak. Someone had tipped Marcus off that a buyout was coming, and I needed to know who was still playing both sides. As I scrolled through the digital grains of time, a notification popped up on the bottom of the screen. An incoming call from the front gate. "Yes," I answered, leaning back into the leather. "Ma'am, Marcus Thorne is at the perimeter." The guard's voice crackled. "He's not screaming like his wife was. He's asking for a meeting. Says he has an offer you can't refuse." I looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. The city outside was a blurred mosaic of neon and rain, but inside this room, everything was surgically sharp. Marcus Thorne didn't make offers. He made demands wrapped in the velvet of a compromise. "Let him in," I said, a slow, cold heat rising in my chest. "But tell him he's coming in through the service entrance. I wouldn't want him to feel out of place." The wait was intentional. I let him stand in the hallway for exactly 10 minutes, long enough for the dampness of his coat to settle and the reality of his position to sink in. When the door finally opened, Marcus Thorne didn't look like a titan of industry. He looked like a man who had spent the last 6 hours watching his stock price hemorrhage. He didn't sit. He stood by the door, eyes scanning the room as if looking for the waitress he remembered. He found a CEO instead. "You've been very busy, Elena," he said, his voice a low, rhythmic rumble. "I have to admit, the play for the mortgage was inspired. But let's be practical. You can't run this place. You don't have the distributors, you don't have the promoters, and you certainly don't have the stomach for the legal battles I'm about to unleash." He tossed a thick envelope onto the desk. "Double what you paid. Cash. You walk away tonight, and the incidents with my wife stay in this room. You get to be a millionaire, and I get my property back." I didn't even touch the envelope. I simply tapped a key on my keyboard, and the large monitor on the wall flickered to life. It showed the footage I'd found earlier. Marcus Thorne in a hushed conversation with a local city councilman, exchanging an envelope that looked remarkably like the one on my desk. "I think you've misunderstood the situation, Marcus," I said, standing up and walking toward the window. The reflection of the club's sign cast a red glow across his face. "I don't want your money. I already have your club, and in about 30 seconds, I'm going to have your silence." The micro-twist in his expression was subtle, but I caught it. The predator had finally realized he was caught in a trap of his own making. "What do you want?" he asked, the arrogance finally beginning to crack. "I want the names of every vendor you've been using to launder the club's overhead," I replied, turning to face him. "And then, I want you to walk out the same way Julianne did, with nothing but your dignity, if you can find any left in that suit." He stared at me, the silence stretching until it felt like it might snap. The power in the room had shifted so completely that the air felt thin. He realized then that I wasn't just a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. I was a competitor who had been studying his playbook for years while I refilled his water glass. Marcus Thorne looked at the monitor, then back at me, his face pale under the flickering office lights. For a man who built an empire on leverage, he knew when he had been outplayed. Without a word, He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a sleek, black notebook, and tore out a page covered in cramped, elegant handwriting. He set it on the desk, next to the rejected bribe. The distributors, the private lenders, and the politicians who look the other way. He muttered, his voice devoid of its usual resonance. "You're playing a dangerous game, Elena. This city doesn't like it when the help moves into the master bedroom." "The city doesn't care who holds the keys, Marcus," I replied, picking up the paper and scanning the names. "It only cares that the doors stay open. Now, get out. My cleaning crew is arriving, and I don't want them tripping over the trash." He turned on his heel and vanished into the hallway. I watched him on the security footage as he exited through the service door, his shoulders slumped against the rain. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The world he knew had been rewritten in a single business day. I spent the rest of the night in that office, but I didn't sleep. I spent it making calls. By 4 a.m., every vendor on that list had received an encrypted message. The ownership had changed. The terms remained the same, but the loyalty was now directed to me. By 6 a.m., the club's social media accounts were wiped clean of the Thorn legacy, replaced by a single image, a gold key on a white background. The transformation was more than aesthetic. It was structural. I walked down to the main floor as the sun began to bleed through the high windows, casting long, golden fingers across the dance floor. The air felt lighter, purged of the toxic ego that had occupied it for so long. I found the head of security, the man who had seen my denied entry order through to the end. "The list of band patrons is growing," I told him, handing him a digital file. "Starting with anyone who carries a Thorn Group badge. If they even step on the sidewalk in front of my door, I want them trespassed." "Understood, boss," he said, and the word didn't feel forced. It felt earned. I walked to the front entrance and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The morning air was crisp, smelling of ozone and new beginnings. Across the street, a newsstand was already displaying the early editions. The business section featured a small, frantic headline about a sudden management shakeup at the Gilded Rose. I leaned against the doorframe, watching the city wake up. 41 days ago, I was a girl, with a tray and a bruised ego. Today, I was the woman who owned the room. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gold-plated access card Julianne had dropped in her panic. I looked at it for a moment, then tossed it into the gutter. I didn't need a card anymore. I owned the locks. The transition from waitress to owner was complete, but the final stroke wasn't about the money or the title. It was about the silence. I stood in the center of the main floor, watching as the new cleaning crew scrubbed away the last physical remnants of the Thorn era. The heavy, oppressive scent of Julianne's signature perfume was replaced by the sharp, clean aroma of citrus and cedar. I looked up at the mezzanine where, 41 days ago, I had been laughed at. Now, I saw my reflection in the glass of the executive booth. I looked like a woman who had finally stepped out of the background of someone else's life and into the lead role of her own. My phone buzzed on the mahogany bar. A single text message from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but you've just inherited 100 enemies." I didn't delete it. I didn't even flinch. I simply tapped a command on my tablet, and the security footage from the front entrance appeared. Julianne Thorn was standing by her car at the edge of the property, staring up at the building that no longer belonged to her. She looked small, not because of the distance, but because her power had always been a borrowed suit that no longer fit. I signaled to the head of security. He didn't need a verbal order. He saw her on his own screen, stepped out onto the sidewalk, and simply pointed to the no trespassing sign, freshly bolted to the stone pillar. It was the final denied entry. I watched her turn away, her heels catching in the gutter, before she disappeared into the morning fog. The club was finally quiet, The bank had confirmed the wire transfers. The purchase agreement was filed in the city archives, and the staff had been briefed on the new protocol: excellence without ego. I walked behind the bar, not to serve, but to take stock. I poured myself a single glass of the vintage champagne Julianne had once used as a weapon against me. The bubbles danced against the crystal, bright and defiant. I raised the glass to the empty room, to the ghosts of the girl I used to be, and to the future I had built out of a single moment of humiliation. In this city, they tell you that the cream rises to the top. They forget to mention that sometimes it's the person who knows exactly how the kitchen works who ends up owning the restaurant. I took a sip, the cold liquid sharp and sweet. The Gilded Rose was dead. Long live the new queen.